Hey everyone, welcome back. Dr. Dan here, and today we're going to cover probably one of my bigger pet peeves when it comes to practicing in the weight management, obesity, and weight loss space. And that has to be around the unnecessary controversy that we've created with regards to insulin. And before we dive into things, just a quick reminder to hit that button down below, to subscribe so you don't miss another video. As well, give me a like, send me a comment, let me know if you like the video or not, or if there's a topic that you'd like me to cover, so I can make sure that I get you guys the most evidence-based information as possible. So why does insulin have this unnecessary controversy around it, right? What has essentially happened is the diet warriors, particularly those that belong to the keto, carnivore, the Dr. Jason Fung group, intermittent fasting, those kind of groups of individuals, and very much on the extreme side, have really painted insulin as the spawn of the devil. And in fact, they've kind of lumped sugar with it as well. So pretty much they've gone out and they've marketed and said that insulin is essentially everything that is wrong with the world. So for example, you got a flat tire on the way to work today? It was definitely insulin and sugar that caused that. COVID in 2020? Yep, that was definitely insulin's fault, no doubt about it. But anyways, kidding only kind of aside really, what they really blame insulin and sugar's fault for is the obesity epidemic that we're currently seeing in our world. So before we dive into a bit of their backwards logic, let's actually look at what is insulin? Where does it come from and what does it do in the body? So insulin is a hormone that gets released into our bloodstream in response to food. Food hits our stomach, insulin gets released, okay? And it comes from an organ in our body called the pancreas. And in particular, within the pancreas, there's a group of cells that we call the beta islet cells that insulin gets released from. Now, the pancreas kind of looks like a bit like a slug. It's yellow in color, at least that's the way it's always depicted in my anatomy textbooks. And it has kind of an upside down Nike logo shape to it. You know, hopefully that's enough that Nike will consider sponsoring me. But anyways, that's what it kind of looks like. And the pancreas generally hides behind our stomach and our liver, and it has a head, which is kind of the bigger end of it, and it also has a tail, which is the smaller end of it. The head of the pancreas is attached to our small intestine so that the pancreas can release digestive enzymes and various other molecules into our small intestine to help us digest our food. The tail then bumps up against one of our more useless organs in the body called the spleen. So overall, it helps us digest food, it helps us release insulin so that we can regulate our blood sugars. So it's a pretty important organ overall. And in fact, people who don't have a pancreas or are missing part of pancreas don't do that well. So insulin is what we would call an anabolic hormone. It allows us to build muscle, fat, and tissues throughout the body. So the one word that might kind of confuse people a little bit there is the word anabolic. So anabolic essentially means building and growth. And one way you can kind of think about it is anabolic steroids, right? So anabolic steroids are taken by bodybuilders to achieve that cartoon-like muscle appearance and to grow their muscles, right? Now, it also might cause them to have bouts of rage here and there, but in general, as long as they're watered and fed and have a gym to work out in, they're quite delightful individuals. Now, insulin levels in our body will increase in order to bring our blood sugars down. That's kind of the main job of it. But in reality, it has the ability to shuttle all nutrients that come into our bloodstream from the bloodstream into our cells. And the nutrients that insulin is shuttling comes from the food that we eat. So our body, our stomach, our digestive system breaks down the food that we eat into much smaller and simpler forms so that it can be absorbed, can travel in the bloodstream, and can allow it to be taken up by our cells. So to give you some examples here, protein gets broken down to amino acids, fat gets broken down to fatty acids, and carbohydrates get broken down to glucose or sugar, okay? And the way that insulin acts is it's kind of like a key. So it goes to the cells in your body, and key goes in, and it opens up a door, which then allows the nutrients that we were just talking about to move from the bloodstream inside of the cell. And when the cell takes up these nutrients, it allows it to do the things that cells do. Main point is to keep us alive and keep us breathing. And kind of one way to think about insulin is that, you know, our cells throughout our body are kind of like babies, and insulin is the mother that's feeding those babies the pulverized fruit mash that she calls food. And once insulin has done its job, it's taken the nutrients from the bloodstream into the cells, or the mother has done feeding the babies and they're all burped and happy and stuff like that, insulin levels will then reduce, and then they just sit and wait until the cycle continues again, until you have another meal or another snack or something like that. So it's all pretty frickin' amazing if you ask me. So why does insulin get all this hate? It does all these wonderful things. We just said what it's all doing, and it's building tissues and keeping us alive. So why do people hate it? What did insulin do to the people? Well, as I mentioned beforehand, those diet factions of the Dr. Jason Fung, the keto and carnivore groups and such, have labeled insulin as a fat storage hormone, which technically is true. So what I mean by that is that insulin opens the door on essentially all cells. That includes fat cells. So insulin can open the door on the fat cells and allow for glucose and fatty acids to be taken up by the fat cells and ultimately cause the fat cells to swell and get larger, and thus that can cause you to gain weight. As well, when insulin is around at higher concentrations and higher levels, what can ultimately happen there is that it'll actually shut down the process of catabolism, or the breakdown of your fat stores and using your fat stores as energy. So the general premise by those diet factions is essentially that if we can reduce your insulin levels to the lowest level possible, essentially we can allow you to get shredded. And since carbohydrates and sugar cause insulin levels to go up, we need to eliminate all of those as well in order to get your insulin levels as down and as low as possible. So that's why we have keto, which is a high fat, high protein diet, carnivore, which is just meat essentially, and things like intermittent fasting as well. So you are restricting the amount of food and carbohydrates you're eating in a day. And the idea being is that those diets will solve all of your weight management problems. They are the key and the ticket to the weight loss success that you're seeking. Not actually, but stay with me here. Now you're probably thinking that, yeah, all of that really makes sense. So what gives here, Dr. Dan? What is the deal? Does insulin actually make us fat? Is it actually that problematic? And why am I even listening to you? Because that all makes sense. So what more could you possibly have to say? Well, the short answer is no, insulin doesn't make you fat, okay? The longer answer is that insulin, doesn't make you fat. It's more the excess amount of calories that ultimately leads to you gaining more fat and ultimately gaining weight. So as I highlighted above, yes, insulin is a fat storage hormone. It acts on fat cells, opens up that door, and allows glucose and fatty acids to go inside of the cell. There's no question about that, okay? However, that system is only going to be activated and storing fat when there is an excess amount of fatty acids and glucose kicking around. If there isn't, then that's not going to happen. You see, fat storage serves an extremely important evolutionary role for us. So if we look back 30,000 years ago, our bodies always wanted to have some amount of fat storage available. And the reason for that is because we were actually hunting and gathering our food. And if we were particularly bad at those tasks, we could go really long periods of time without eating anything. So our bodies would need some kind of reserve energy where it could draw from in order to keep us functioning, keep us alive, and allow us to go out and hunt and gather. So fat served a very, very important role. However, we need to review that when we did eat and when we do eat, our body has a bit of a priority system. So if you've gone a period of time without eating, such as between breakfast and lunch or breakfast to dinner, whatever your kind of eating patterns are, essentially what's going to happen is your body is going to prioritize the nutrients for the cells that need them right now. It's not going to say, hey, you know what, we're going to draw a whole bunch of these nutrients off and just store them away because maybe we'll use them later, maybe we won't, tough to say, that sort of thing. It's like, no, you have a number of organ systems that are functioning all day, every day, and are going to need those nutrients in order to keep functioning and keep you alive. It wouldn't make sense for it to be stored away as fat for it to maybe be used later on. So our brain is a wonderful example of this that thinks it's quite special. And our brain actually sucks a ton of nutrients from our bloodstream because it's a bit of a selfish asshole. As well, it sits on top of the head if that wasn't enough. And so it needs to suck up those nutrients as much as it possibly can to keep itself functioning. And then basically it leaves the rest of the scraps for the rest of your organ systems to fight over and to get at. Anyways, once the dust is settled and all of your other organs have gotten their nutrients, and like I said, they're little babies, they're all topped up, feeling full, feeling good, the insulin will then turn to your fat cells for anything that is left over. And it'll say, hey, fat cells, we've got all this extra blood sugar and fatty acids. We're going to store those, okay? Because we need them for later potentially. Because I don't know when the next meal is going to come. We're still believing that we're living in a world 30,000 years ago. And so if there's an excess amount of fatty acids and sugars around, it's going to then get stored by insulin, okay? But if there isn't an excess kicking around, well, then it's not going to get stored. It's going to get used by the cells that took the priority, and the rest, there won't be anything left for insulin to store in the fat cells. So if there's nothing left over, you're not going to gain any fat. And in fact, if you're actually burning more calories than what you're taking in and more nutrients what you're taking in, then you're going to actually lose weight. And vice versa, if there is excess hanging around, it's going to get stored as fat, and over time, it's going to lead to weight gain. Now, as I've always said, it's not going to be one day, one meal that's going to throw you off. It's all about consistency. So if you are consistently eating an excess amount of calories, you're going to gain weight. If you are consistently in a calorie deficit and not eating as many calories as you're burning, then you're going to lose weight. This is the process of energy balance. It is like a fundamental law of physics. I can't remember if it was Newton or Einstein that did it. I didn't do well in physics in school, but I feel kind of smart talking about this stuff because essentially it's the work that they did, and we can't forego the laws of physics. Now, one important point that I want to highlight here that the Keto, Carnivore, and Dr. Jason Fung fan clubs kind of forget to mention is that protein also causes a spike in insulin. So if you're having nothing but protein, you've eliminated the carbohydrates, you're still going to get spikes in your insulin levels. And in some cases, your insulin levels will actually be spiked higher with some of the proteins versus some of the sugars and carbohydrates. So if we use their logic, well, the foods they're eating still causes insulin to go up, but yet they're quote unquote losing weight. So what the hell is going on there? How are they losing weight if they have all this insulin floating around? Well, that's the one thing that they forget to tell you is they kind of leave that part of it out and really focus on the sugar and the insulin being the horrible devils that they are. And clearly what is happening in their situation as well is that when they've eliminated the carbohydrates, they've created that calorie deficit. So there isn't as many excess fatty acids and glucose and that sort of thing floating around, created the calorie deficit, so no fat gets stored. In fact, they start burning fat if they're in that calorie deficit. So in conclusion, insulin doesn't make you fat. Eating an excess amount of calories does. Now, I know it can be very challenging for some individuals, and it's very challenging to know where is that excess amount of calories coming from. In particular, if you feel like you're in a calorie deficit, you're doing calorie counting and that sort of thing, and suddenly, the weight's not going down, it's remaining stable, what have you, it's going to be very frustrating because, well, I'm in a calorie deficit. Why am I not losing weight? And so it becomes very easy to jump on board and to think that this keto carnivore aspect of things makes sense. But fundamentally, what's happening is that you're getting an extra amount of calories somewhere. And if you switch over to the keto and carnivore and you do start losing weight, simply it's the case that, you suddenly went into a calorie deficit. So you're eating some extra calories somewhere. Now, trying to figure that out and stuff is not easy. And that's the biggest thing that I work with with my patients is that trying to identify or even just get into a calorie deficit can be extremely challenging for some people because of life. Life sucks sometimes and doesn't allow it to be all pretty and perfect and you have the perfect diet and meal planning and stuff like that. Sometimes it's just not possible between having kids, work, all the other stresses that come with it. So it becomes very, very challenging and might not be possible to achieve a calorie deficit. Not to mention all the other factors like genetics, physiology, your environment, your socioeconomic status. All of those are going to play a role in your ability to lose weight and to manage your weight fundamentally. And ultimately, if weight loss is your goal for the right reasons, you need to be in a calorie deficit. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That is what needs to happen. If going on a keto diet allows that to happen, great, fantastic, but it has to be sustainable for you. Whatever you do to lose the weight, you've got to maintain it for the long term to keep the weight off. And so for an even better solution, let's stop focusing on the numbers on the scale, because really that's out of your control in a lot of ways, and instead focus on healthy behaviors. So getting more activity in, watching what portion sizes you're eating, looking at mindfulness practices and stuff like that, and just being in a better place around just focusing on health, because that's what's really going to give you the health outcomes that you're looking for, not the number on the scale, because you could lose weight and you could still be unhealthy. I see it all the time. So focus on the health behaviors, and generally what ends up happening when people focus on health behaviors, weight loss just happens because health is the focus now. It's not the scale, it's not the stress around that. It's just, hey, I'm trying to be healthier and I'm trying to be better every single day. So let's cut insulin and sugar a break. They are two fantastic and wonderful things. We all love our insulin because it keeps us alive. We love our sugar. God, I know I do. So cut them a break, and we'll check in with you guys next time. Remember, click the button below to subscribe, and if you liked the video, leave a like, leave a comment, let me know how things are going, and we'll see you next time, guys.